Last week I got a little bit excited. Did any of you? Yeah. Can you remember it? It was a week ago. Lots happened then. You've probably seen a few nativity plays since then, been shopping, had to buy food, had to buy Christmas presents, wrap a few things up, because Christmas is really coming now, isn't it? Last week we had the first in Advent, and it was a kind of a bit odd because it was still November. Now it is December. Yes. December. Yes. Okay. The month that we remember Jesus was born. And all the familiar stuff happens, doesn't it? We kind of get used to it, and part of it is the story. Has anybody been to a nativity thing yet? Has anyone? Yes, a few of you have. Yes, so you've seen the story. We know it well, the kings and the shepherds and all that stuff, all the stuff that we know. The familiar story, Jesus being born in a manger. So I'm just going to get our mind into where we are, because it's been a busy week for a lot of us, isn't it, really? And then we get to this theme that I want us to think about for a little while, which is why? Why did all this happen? What's the point of it? And last week we looked at God with us, and we looked at glory last week. And can any of you remember what we talked about, how surprising that glory was? Do you remember it? I know it was a long time ago now, but, glory, God's glory. Or as a friend of mine used to say, God's glory, which is a much better way of saying it. God's glory. And God's glory was not something hugely wonderful and vast in a way. God's glory was about suffering and about servanthood. Do you remember that? Yes. Isn't it incredible that God would do that? And as I said last week, just to remind you, those of you that were here, and for those of you that weren't, just to kind of bring you up to speed, what we were saying a little about that last week, let me just show you the verse. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And I said last week, that Word that became flesh was the ever-existing, always being God. That has always been there, all-powerful, everything, no comparison to him whatsoever. That Word is what became flesh, which is just remarkable. I can never get over it. I just can't, because it's so huge. Made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. There's only one, and that's him, who came from the Father, and then full of grace and truth. And I don't know about you, but sometimes, I've known the Bible for quite a long time now, so when I read these verses, when I start reading them, I know what comes next. Do you? Yeah, you know the next bit, don't you, sometimes? And so you kind of start it and think, I know what's going to come, and when it comes, it doesn't surprise you, does it? Because you knew it was going to come. But I think this sometimes, like when I do read the Bible, that if I read the Bible and had never read it, and there was a time in my life I had never read it, but if I did read it and had never read it, and I'd never been inside of a church, and I'd never really thought about God in any serious way, and I picked this up and read this, we've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of, I don't think I would put, if I was outside of church, if I can put it this way, and I thought what a lot of people outside of church think about church, and I thought what would God be full of when he came to the world, I don't think I would choose the word grace. I think a lot of people would say full of anger, full of judgment, full of accusation. Because the world in which we live in deserves judgment and anger and accusation, doesn't it? If you think about it, the things that are going on. And I don't think any of us can sit here today and not be aware of all the terrible things that are going on in the world right now. We just can't, can we? We see this world is in a mess, isn't it? And we live in a world which is in a mess. And the challenge, I think, for us is that we live in a world, and the mess is explained by so many people in a way now that says, let's just take God out of the equation, let's forget God. Everything that people do is as a result of something that happened to them in their life. It has a natural cause, nothing supernatural. So what we've got to do is get the education right, sort it all out, and we'll all be okay. And what we don't recognise is that there's a spiritual dimension that most people just want to forget all about. Here's the reality this scripture deals with. The world is sinful and dark because we choose spiritually to reject God, deny God, and live our way and do our thing. Is that fair? And the challenge is, I think, that for many people, that's why so many thousands and millions of people come along and enjoy the Christmas story every year, but don't think about what it means for them. They just see it as a little story, nothing to do with the realities that we face every day of our lives in the world in which we live. But the background to this is that the world has rebelled against God and chosen to do its own thing and wants to live its own way. And this is how God responds to it. And that's why the word is surprising. Because if we think about a world in rebellion, a world full of people that want to be... And when I say the word, I'm talking about me, by the way, and you. Want to be selfish, yeah? Don't we prefer that, really? Greedy? Have our own way, don't we? That's what we all want to be like, isn't it? I said last week, you haven't got to train anybody to be like that. We don't need to go on seminars of selfishness. They're not required. Oh, teach me how to be selfish. I want to know how to do it. Teach me greed. I want to be greedy. You don't know. Whoever needs to be taught that? Nobody, do they? But to love and to serve and to care for people, that doesn't come so naturally, does it, to us? Which is why it's so surprising that it says full of grace and truth. And get it, just feel it. The all-ever-existing being called God, this word, this logos that I talked about last week, this eternal being becomes flesh. And he becomes flesh and is full of grace. Just a few verses on it says this, out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. You ever seen that verse before? We've received grace in place of grace already given. What that means is you don't just get it once, you have to keep on getting it. And I'll come back to that a bit later on. We need grace all the time. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And what that's saying is this, I'm still just setting up what I want to talk about today for a little while. What that's saying is this, that when Jesus comes, he actually helps us to have a way of getting to know and have God in our lives that we could not have before. And here's why. Because previously, the way God showed himself through Moses was through the law. And what the law did was it showed us that we weren't good enough. Because the law made requirements of us that we just cannot keep. We just can't do it. We fail. How often do you fail? You know, just all the time, don't you? Just all the time. You can be having a good thought and then a bad one slips in, doesn't it? You can do a good thing and then you do a bad one. I remember, I don't know if any of you saw it, but the year before last, I think it was, when Dolly Parton was at Glastonbury. Did any of you see that? Dolly Parton at Glastonbury, can you imagine it? And she got 144,000 Glastonbury concert goers with their arms in the air singing a Jesus song. Did you not see it? It's worth looking at on Google, it really is. But what she talked about, and I can never forget it, for me it was so powerful because I thought, how would God ever get the gospel communicated at Glastonbury? And the answer, Dolly Parton. Isn't it incredible? And this is basically what she said. Have you all ever noticed? She goes, so she stands there. She's about my height, but bigger. Have you all ever noticed, she says, how you try to do something good and you've got the old devil on one shoulder and the God on the other one and you get this one whispering and that. And she just spoke like that. And she said, isn't it funny how we always do the bad thing and not the good thing? But she said, I believe that God came to this world and Jesus came to die. So even when I do the bad thing, God can help me do the good thing. Do you all believe that? Let's sing this little song. And I'll start singing it. Isn't it crazy? But in that very simple way, isn't that the truth? Yeah. Really? When you reduce it all down, isn't that the truth? Here's the thing. The law, that's what it says, the law was given through Moses. The law, all it does is show us that we can't do it. Because if for the way we please this God, and God's character, his nature is that he is good. And therefore sin offends him. And because his nature is good and sin offends him, you roll that out. What that means is if God just says sin doesn't matter, sin's okay, we end up with a world that's in a complete mess. Because if we actually say it doesn't matter what's right and what's good, we'll just all do our own thing, what do you end up with? A world that just destroys itself, don't you? I don't think it's any accident that we're seeing so much destruction and decay across the world at a time when most people are saying we don't need God anymore. And look at this one. This is why. For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the sinful nature. Can you see that? For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the sinful nature, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. What we can't do, this is what it's saying, what we can't do, God did. As hard as we try, we can't do it. But the Christmas story is about the fact that God intervened in our humanity, took upon flesh, and he did what we cannot do. Isn't that great? Amen. For what let's read it together. I want you to say it, not just hear it. Let's read it together. For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the sinful nature, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. Just look at it for 10 more seconds and take it in. Where would we be if that wasn't true? We'd still be trying to keep the law, getting it right all the time. The challenge for some of us, friends, as Christians is, even though we believe that, that's still how we operate. Jesus was full of grace. I emphasise the word full there. I put bold on it. You put Control B, it works, doesn't it? Or Command B, actually, it is on my computer. It becomes bigger. I put it that way because I wanted us to get, just again, that sense of full. And without getting too heavy and technical, that little word full there refers back to the big words that came before about this word being always, ever, only God and incomparably just the one that could do it. That's what that word full means. In other words, Jesus was full of grace because he was full of God. He was God. He lived out, he showed, he exampled the very character of the pre-existent always being God. And therefore he was full of what God was full of. And what is God full of? Grace. Do you see? So when Jesus moved and spoke and lived and did what he did, he was showing people in a moment, he was letting them see just in a short period of time what God was like, is like, and will always be like. He's giving us a glimpse as he goes among people. And I just got a few pictures which I thought you'd like to see. Who did God meet with when he became a person? Now, some of these images I've taken from different movies that have been made about Jesus, and also some of them are more up to date. People that I just took pictures of, only a few. That's a prostitute. Because when I put in Google, Jesus met a prostitute, that's the picture I got. We know this, but isn't it phenomenal when you think about it? When the ever-existing Word became flesh, he actually spent time with prostitutes. Not engaging in activity, but he let them come to him. He listened to them. He heard their story. He touched them. He welcomed them. He wanted to renew them and transform. Do you see what I'm saying? See, grace is not just a position. It's an action. If we believe in grace, we will therefore do something. That's the point. This is a more contemporary. Jesus fed lots of people that were hungry, so I just saw this. Help us. We need food. Jesus' heart broke over people that had nothing, didn't he? Because God cares about these things. Jesus showed us the character of God. Who is God? What is God like? Jesus was showing us what this grace word means when you actually do something with it. It's a leper. You know, the religious people of the day, when Jesus, who said they knew God, they didn't go near the lepers. They were the unclean. They were the untouchables. But Jesus touched them. Isn't it remarkable? Full of grace. Full of grace. Beggars. I purposely kept that up with nothing on it so you could actually see the contrast there between that image of people that have got nowhere to sleep and then that verse I've had up all the time about Jesus. And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And to me, that just did something quite powerful when I put those two things together. That when God became a person, there was no room for him to be born. He was homeless. And there's that picture of people. That's identification, isn't it? Grace. This is what God's character is like. God's character. That's a lame person. I put in Jesus and a lame person. I got that on Google. And you know, if a lame person can walk, then suddenly their whole life is restored. They can do all kinds of things. You're getting the picture. I want you to see some images and not just hear some words, because for me the key to this is that when God became a person, this ever-existing God became a person and was full of grace, that didn't just mean he said things. I'm going to talk next week, we're going to look at full of truth. We'll look at some things he said, but I wanted you to get a sense of a feeling that grace is actually an inspiration more than anything to act and to do something. Because that's what God's character is like. And if people are going to see what God's character is like, they need to see it being lived out. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He showed people what God is like. And this interests me. This was the response of those people at the time of Jesus who said they believed in God. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Do you see the picture? So Jesus is showing us what God is like. And those people that said they knew God moaned because he was doing things they didn't want God to be doing. Let's just take a minute or two to think about what this word grace is. Grace is undeserved favour. I think that when you look at that word grace that we have in the New Testament and we look at it in John's verse that we just looked at, John uses the word about 4 times in the opening part of his gospel. He keeps using it. And it's got some real deep meaning to it. But I summarise it in that way. Grace is undeserved favour. In other words, we begin, and I'll show this on another slide in a little while, but what it really means is something like this. It means that we don't get what we should get. We do get what we shouldn't. We don't get what we deserve. But what we do is we do get what we don't deserve. That's the full, and I'll come back to that in just a little while. But does anyone know who he is? Anyone seen this movie? He's the bishop in the movie Les Miserables, which was out a few years ago. Anyone Les Mis fans? A few of you? Anyone hate it? Some people don't like it at all. I know that there are some people that say, I don't want to see it, it makes me miserable. But I wanted to just... The whole of this movie, the whole story that Victor Hugo wrote, the whole thing is actually all about law and grace. That's what the whole thing is about. That is the plot. That one person tries to get to God by fulfilling the law, and the other one actually has to receive grace. Years and years and years and years and years and years and years ago, when our children were small, Billiericay Baptist Church gave a little gift to our family and said, do something nice at Christmas. And we took our kids to see Les Mis. It's one of our little folklore stories of our family. And I can always remember now Amy saying, I need to go to the toilet. And I said, well, let's go in here. She said, we can't go in there, we haven't got a ticket. And I got the tickets out and showed them to her. I've always, as part of our life, the Pethers family, that's when we first saw that. But ever since I've seen Les Mis, I've always just been, personally, just the truth of it. And that what I love about that clip is when he says, you forgot to take these also. Would you leave the best behind? That's grace, you see. Mercy is not getting what you deserve, while grace is getting what you do not deserve. Do you see? You forgot to take these also. Would you leave the best behind? In other words, God doesn't want to say you're forgiven, but now you're going to feel bad about it for the rest of your life. God says you're forgiven, and now I want you to enjoy living the life that I intend for you to live. Do you see the difference? So it's not, I became a Christian, and now what I've got to spend the rest of my life doing is feeling guilty. I don't do it very well. I've got to keep trying. I'm going to get it wrong, but in the end, if I'm lucky, I might just still get there. That's what so many of us live in, that place. Rather than, God has done it all. Everything. You forgot to take these also. You with me? Would you leave the best behind? That's the point. What he's saying is, it's all been done. God is generous. God is reckless. God just does it in such a way that we could never, ever imagine. That's what it means to be not a little bit of grace, but full of grace. Amen. I'm running out of time. But I'm going to just spend a bit of time on this before we get into... in a little while, we're going to do this, which Jesus called the New Covenant. And here's the thing. The law was the old covenant. So God said, keep this law and that will be good. But we couldn't. So a new one came along, which actually said we can't keep the law. So somebody else kept it for us. Let's move on quickly. I showed this picture last week. You might remember it if you were here. And I wanted to show it again because my thinking was this, that when we talk about God's glory revealed in the flesh, this is where we see it at its height. And what we see here, this is just an image taken from a movie, obviously about Jesus, but what we see here, we see this reality. That when it comes to grace, we can often misunderstand it and think what grace means is that what God does is he turns a blind eye to our sin and it doesn't matter anymore. That's what we can think, It's like, well, God's good, God's loving, and God doesn't mind. So if we try our hardest and do our best and don't get too much wrong, then when we do slip up, God will just say, well, that didn't matter, it's okay, it's fine. That's not what grace means. What grace actually means is this, that sin really does matter to God. And here's the reality. When we sin, please hear this and just try to get it into your psyche, into your gut, into your soul. When we sin, we are forgiven because somebody else paid. Not because it doesn't matter, but because somebody else paid. Somebody else paid the price. Somebody else took the blame. Somebody else actually got what we deserve, mercy, so that we can get what we don't deserve, which is a life forever and ever and ever. Isn't it incredible? Isn't it? I love preaching here. But isn't it? If we would just get a hold of it, you, me, that God would actually do something to take what we deserve, death, punishment, so we can get what we don't deserve, life forever. Isn't that just incredible? Yes. I want to just read you something. I'm going to flick on a couple. I haven't got enough time to do all of my slides. I'm going to flick on. I want you to see this picture. Just a young boy. I want to read this to you. I'm going to edit it a little bit because I should get told off for taking too long otherwise. But I do want to do this, then finish. So I came across a while ago. It's a little bit, it's vaguely American, but forgive me for that. And it's also a little bit capable of being seen as a bit twee, but forgive me for that. Because through it, this spoke to me a while ago when I read it. It's simple, but let me just read it to you. The boy stands defiantly. It starts with his head back and his hands clenched and says to the headmaster, "Go on, do it." And the headmaster says to the boy, "How many times have you been here?" And the boy just sneers back at him and says, "Apparently not enough." The headmaster gives the boy a strange look and says, "You've been punished every time, haven't you?" The boy says, "Yeah, I've been punished, if that's what you call it." He throws out his chest and says, "Go on, whatever, dish it out, I can take it." And carefully studying the boy's face, the head says, are there any thoughts of punishment when you break these rules?" The boy says, "No, I do what I want, when I want, and you ain't going to stop me." And then the head looks over at a teacher who's sitting nearby and says, "What did he do this time?" And the teacher says, "Fighting. He took Tommy and shoved his head against a wall." The head turns at the boy and says, "Why'd you do that? What did Tommy do to you?" "Nothing. I just didn't like the way he was looking at me. And in fact, I don't like the way you're looking at me either. And if I could, I'd bang your head against a wall." And then the head looks at this young boy and says, "I want to teach you a lesson." I don't know what the boy would have thought at that time. "I want to teach you a lesson. I want to teach you a lesson about what grace is." And the little boy says, "Grace? Isn't that what you old people say before you have something to eat? I don't need any of your stinking grace." "Oh, but you do," says the head. "You do." So what grace is, it's about somebody else getting what you deserve. And then the boy says, "Are you going to hit me or not? Or are you going to let me just get away with this?" And the principal, or head, they call him principal, I'm saying head because that's more of an English word. The head looks down at this boy and says, "Yeah, you can walk. You're not going to get punished this time." And the boy looks back at the head and says, "What, no punishment? You're not going to punish me even though I whacked Tom and shoved his face against the wall?" And this is the key bit I want you just to hear. And just, it's simple, but just to hear it and feel it. And the head says back to him, "Oh, there has to be punishment. What you did was wrong. And there's always a consequence for our actions. There will be punishment. Grace is not an excuse for doing wrong." "I knew it," said the boy, and he puts his hands out. "I knew it. I knew there was a trick. You're going to whack me, aren't you?" And he stands there with his hands out. And then what happens is this. The head teacher walks up to the boy. He gestures to the other teacher that's in the room. He places the boy's hands down by his side, and he then gives the teacher his belt, and he puts his hands out. And he then looks at the boy and says, "Count the strikes." And the teacher starts whacking the headmaster's hands. And the little boy, I wrote this down because this is how it says it. The little boy looks up and he hears the voice crack. It says this: "The young boy jumps, shock registers across his face. 1, he whispers. Crack, 2, 3. And the boy's counting 1, 2, 3. And then after 4 or 5, the boy says, "Stop, stop, stop doing it." But the teacher carries on. And then the boy cries out again. He says, stop, I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who deserves this punishment. Stop, stop, stop. It's not fair. And finally, when it's over, this headmaster with, as it says written down here, sweat glistening across his forehead, he turns to him and says, this, my boy, is grace. See, somebody had to pay. But the one who paid, in this quaint little story, but deep, isn't it? The one who paid was the one who actually, in many ways, has been offended against. Are you with me? The one who should fulfill the law, the one who should actually he should punish the boy. But he's the one who paid. Does that just help in a simple way to see what we're talking about when we have this image of Jesus and we think about all that it says when God was full of grace? This is the simplicity but the depth of it. Here's what it means. The Word became flesh, full of grace, means this. That our sin, the sin of this world, still offends God. It breaks his heart. It causes him, I don't even know what the words are to explain what God must feel when he looks at the mess this world is in right now and sees what people are doing to each other. And we all do it. It's so easy to blame somebody else. But as my wife said earlier on, it's so hard to say sorry. Here's the thing. We all need grace. And let me just finish by saying this. We need to receive it. Often we as Christian people, and perhaps some of us here aren't Christians this morning, we get into that place where we think, surely God's grace could never be enough for me. I've done this wrong, I've done that wrong, I've said this, I've done that. If God really knew what I was like, he would never forgive me. Here's the reality. God does know what you're like and he still forgives you. Not because it doesn't matter to him. When you sin, it does annoy him. It does cause him to be angry. It does all of that stuff. Of course it does. Yes, it does. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that you can say, I'm a Christian, so it doesn't matter to God anymore, because it does matter to him. That's not what grace says. What grace says is this. When you sin, I sin, we all do. When we get into behaviour that's wrong and bad, and you know what, I don't know, and I don't even care, but you know what it is, don't you? It's not that it doesn't matter to God anymore because Jesus died for you, so it doesn't matter. No, that's not it. It does matter, but somebody else paid the price. So therefore, God will always, 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 always. That's why I love that verse in John which said this grace and this grace before, however it says it, it's ongoing. It doesn't stop. So let me just say this to you as I finish. Sorry, I've taken a bit longer. Is that all right? We're going to finish a bit late. Do you forgive me? You have to, because it's all about grace. Here's the message. If you are sitting here this morning as a Christian person and thinking, the truth is, I'm just no good. Let me tell you something. That's true of all of us. But God has paid the price. And whatever, God has paid the price for it. So you can bring it to him. And he will take it away. And he will wash you and make you as clean and as white and as pure as Jesus is. Because it's only Jesus that can do it. And if you can believe that and keep that message to yourself, then come and have a word with me. And I want to encourage you not to do that this Christmas. Because somebody that you know needs to hear about a God like that. Let's pray. Just take a moment, just quietly to ask God, what are you saying to me through this message about your grace? God, you know me. You know all about me. You know absolutely everything. And you're full of grace. Full of grace. I know, God, that I don't deserve anything good from you. But thank you, God, that you tell me not to leave the best behind, to receive from you. So right now, in these moments, I receive your grace. Whatever that means, Lord, I receive it. Come into my life, I pray. In Jesus' name. Amen.